I never thought I'd be in this position. I mean, I thought we had a solid relationship, my wife, Jessica, and I have been together for 8 years, married for 5. We had our ups and downs like any other couple, but I never thought anything was really wrong. There were moments here and there where I noticed her pulling away, but I chalked it up to stress. Her job had been really demanding lately, and honestly, I figured that was all it was. Until recently, though, something started to feel off. The way she'd suddenly put her phone down when I walked into a room, or how she'd head out more frequently for work drinks with people she'd never talked about before. And maybe I'm stupid for not seeing it sooner, but I trusted her. I wanted to trust her. I remember the exact moment I started to really suspect something was wrong. It was just a small thing. My cousin Ryan was over one evening, nothing out of the ordinary, he's been a big part of my life since childhood. But there was this weird energy between him and Jessica. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the way they interacted that night was different, like there was some inside joke I wasn't a part of. At first, I dismissed it. Ryan is family. We've been close forever. But little things started to pile up. The signs were subtle at first. Ryan started coming around more often, and Jessica always seemed happier when he was around. I thought maybe it was just the familiarity, Ryan's always been the life of the party, and Jessica had always gotten along with him. But I began to notice things I couldn't ignore. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. and found Jessica downstairs, on the phone. She quickly ended the call when she saw me, brushing it off as work-related. But something in her tone, the nervousness in her eyes, stuck with me. I remember lying in bed afterward, my gut churning. I wanted to believe her, but doubt had already crept in. Then there was the day I came home early from work. I wasn't supposed to be home yet, but a meeting got cancelled. The second I opened the door, I could feel the tension in the air. Jessica was in the kitchen, looking startled when she saw me. And then I noticed Ryan's jacket hanging over the chair. Ryan was just helping me with something, she said casually, but her voice was too forced, too deliberate. Ryan was in the bathroom, and when he came out, he barely made eye contact with me. Something felt wrong. I tried to shake it off, after all, Ryan's my cousin. What reason would I have not to trust him? But that feeling, it wouldn't go away. The unease only grew stronger with each passing day. I started paying closer attention to the little things, Jessica's frequent trips to her car, the way she laughed a bit too loudly at Ryan's jokes, and the lingering glances they exchanged. It was like watching a slow-motion unraveling of something I couldn't quite grasp. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to address it head-on. We were having breakfast, the sun streaming through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the table. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Jessica, we need to talk," I began, my voice betraying the anxiety I felt inside. She looked up from her coffee, a hint of surprise in her eyes. "Sure, what's on your mind?" I hesitated for a moment, gathering my thoughts. "I've noticed some changes lately, how you've been spending more time with Ryan, the late-night calls, things that don't quite add up. Is there something you're not telling me?" Her fork paused midway to her mouth, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of something, fear, guilt, maybe both. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, her tone defensive yet shaky. I reached out, wanting to bridge the growing gap between us. "Please, Jessica. I value our relationship too much to ignore these feelings. If something's wrong, we need to address it together." She sighed, setting her fork down. "It's not what you think. Ryan and I, we've just been friends. Maybe more than that, but it doesn't mean anything." Before I could respond, the phone rang, interrupting the tense moment. It was Ryan. I glanced at the caller ID, my heart sinking. Taking a deep breath, I answered. "Hey, man. Everything okay?" There was a brief pause before Ryan spoke, his voice guarded. "Yeah, just wanted to catch up. Are you free tonight? I forced a smile, trying to keep the conversation light. Sure, maybe we can all hang out sometime. After hanging up, I turned back to Jessica, who seemed visibly relieved. See? Nothing to worry about. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to take matters into my own hands. The following evening, I arrived home earlier than usual, hoping to find some answers. As I walked through the front door, the house was unusually quiet. I noticed Jessica's car keys still on the kitchen counter and the faint sound of music coming from the living room. Curious, I followed the sound, my footsteps silent on the hardwood floors. Peeking around the corner, I saw Jessica and Ryan sitting on the couch, their shoulders touching as they laughed over something on her phone. My heart raced as I watched them, the pieces finally starting to fit together in a way I hadn't wanted to see. I took a step back, my mind reeling. Confronting them in that moment felt both necessary and terrifying. Summoning all my courage, I walked into the room. Jessica, we need to talk, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. They both looked up, surprise and guilt etched on their faces. Silence hung in the air, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on us. To be continued. Jessica shot up from the couch, her face pale, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, clearly trying to avoid my gaze. The room felt heavy, thick with the tension of what was unsaid. What's going on? I asked, my voice barely concealing the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Jessica quickly stepped toward me, hands raised as if to calm me down. It's not what you think, she stammered. Ryan and I were just what, Jessica? Laughing? Hanging out? While you're hiding things from me? I felt my hands trembling. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Please, let me explain. Her voice cracked, but she wasn't crying, no tears. We've just been talking. He's been helping me through a rough time. That's all. Ryan finally spoke up, his voice low, almost a mumble. It's not like that, man. I swear. I let out a bitter laugh, feeling the weight of betrayal sinking in. You expect me to believe that? I've been noticing things for weeks, Jessica. The late-night calls, the time you spend together when I'm not around. The looks, the little touches. I turned to Ryan. And you? You're supposed to be my cousin. My blood. And this is how you repay me. Ryan stood, holding his hands up defensively. Look, bro, I swear nothing physical has happened. I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, about to fall into some dark place I wasn't sure I could climb out of. Nothing physical. I repeated, my voice louder now. What about emotional, then? You've been sneaking around behind my back, and now you're telling me I'm just imagining it. Jessica stepped closer, her hands shaking. It's not like that, really. I never meant for things to get out of control. Ryan and I, we just connected. But I swear, I love you. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, her words cutting deeper than I expected. Love me? How could she stand there and claim to love me while this had been going on behind my back? I stepped away from her, the disbelief turning into a simmering anger. You love me, Jessica. Then why hide all of this? Why didn't you talk to me instead of running to my cousin? She blinked, and for the first time, I saw tears start to form. I was confused, she whispered, voice cracking. I was feeling lost. And Ryan was just there, listening. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me. I felt the words like fire in my throat. Well, congratulations. You failed. Ryan, still standing awkwardly near the couch, cleared his throat. Look, maybe I should go. I spun to face him. You think? I snapped, the fury rising in me. Maybe you should have thought about that before this all started. He nodded, avoiding eye contact, and quickly grabbed his jacket. As he left, he muttered, "I'm sorry, but it didn't even register." When the door closed, Jessica and I were left in the silence of what had just been shattered. I stood there, heart pounding, my head spinning. I couldn't tell if I was angrier at her for betraying me or at myself for not seeing this sooner. "Please," she whispered, taking a step closer. "We can fix this. I'll end whatever this is with Ryan. It was a mistake, and I was stupid. But I love you. I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right." I looked at her, my wife, the person I thought I knew, standing there begging for a second chance. But how do you come back from this? How do you rebuild trust when the very foundation of it has been destroyed? I didn't have the answer, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't ready to forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That night, just as I was replaying the entire confrontation in my head, my phone buzzed. It was Ryan. I hesitated. I wasn't sure I could handle another round of excuses or half-truths. But curiosity and anger won out, so I answered. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat, not bothering to hide the bitterness. "I need to talk, man. Can we meet somewhere? I swear, it's not what you think." I let out a hollow laugh. "Isn't that what you both keep saying? What, you've got another story now? Something that makes this all magically okay?" Ryan sighed on the other end. "No, nothing like that. But I need you to hear me out. Please, just meet me. I'll be at O'Malley's in 20 minutes. I debated it for a second. My instinct was to tell him to screw off, but part of me needed answers, needed to know what had really been going on. So, I grabbed my jacket and headed out. When I arrived at the bar, Ryan was already there, sitting in a dimly lit corner with 2 beers on the table. I sat down across from him, the silence between us heavier than I'd ever felt. He looked like hell, tired, stressed. "Thanks for coming," he said quietly, pushing one of the beers toward me. I ignored it. "Talk," I said bluntly. "Make it quick." Ryan rubbed his face, clearly searching for the right words. "Listen. I know how it looks. And I'm sorry. But you've got to believe me, nothing physical happened between your wife and me." I narrowed my eyes. "You expect me to believe that? After all the sneaking around, the phone calls, the way you two acted around each other? You've been lying to my face for weeks." "I'm not lying about this," he said, his voice rising slightly. "I swear, man. Yeah, we've been talking, and yeah, I know that was wrong. But it was just talking. She was going through stuff, feeling confused about your marriage, and she came to me. That's all." I clenched my jaw, trying to hold back the urge to lash out. "Just talking? So why hide it from me, huh? Why all the secrecy?" Ryan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "That's the thing. I didn't realize how deep her feelings were until recently. She was pouring her heart out about your marriage, about how she felt lost and neglected, but something felt off. It wasn't just about her being confused. It was like she was hiding something bigger, something she didn't want to admit." I stared at him, my heart racing. "What do you mean?" "I don't know for sure," Ryan continued, shaking his head. "But the way she talked about certain things, about you, about her guilt, it didn't add up. She'd get really defensive if I asked too many questions. I started to get the feeling that there was more going on than she was telling me. She was almost too eager to talk to me. Like she was covering for something else." A cold chill ran down my spine. "Are you saying she's lying to me? That this thing with you is just a distraction?" Ryan shrugged, looking guilty. "I don't know, man. But it feels like she's not being honest. I don't think she was telling me the whole truth either." Maybe she wanted to make it seem like I was the problem so you wouldn't look too closely at something else. I sat back, trying to process his words. Could Jessica really be hiding something bigger than what I already knew? What the hell was I missing? Look, Ryan said, running his hands through his hair. I know I've messed up by even getting involved. I should have pushed her to talk to you instead of me. But if I were you, I'd dig deeper. Because whatever's going on with Jessica, I don't think you've gotten the full story. I sat there in silence, my mind racing. Ryan was still a liar, but now, I wasn't sure he was the only one. If Jessica had been hiding something, I needed to find out exactly what it was. I left the bar with my head spinning, Ryan's words echoing in my mind. What the hell could Jessica be hiding? Was this really about something deeper than her emotional affair with Ryan? The thought made my stomach churn. I had to know the truth, even if it hurt more than what I'd already uncovered. When I got home, the house was quiet. Jessica was in the living room, curled up on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She looked up when I walked in, her expression unreadable. "Where were you?" she asked softly. I ignored her question, walking past her to the kitchen. I needed a minute to gather myself. I grabbed a glass of water, staring at it like it held the answers to everything swirling in my head. After a deep breath, I walked back into the living room, standing across from her. "Ryan called," I said flatly, watching her closely for a reaction. Her face barely flinched, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. "What did he say?" "That's what I want to know," I said, stepping closer. "What aren't you telling me, Jessica?" "Because I'm starting to think this whole thing with Ryan is just the tip of the iceberg." She blinked, her face growing pale. "What?" "I already told you everything. I've been honest, Stop lying," I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. "Ryan said you've been hiding something, something bigger than just your feelings for him. What the hell is going on?" Jessica stood up, her hands shaking slightly. "There's nothing else, I swear." "I don't believe you." I interrupted, my anger boiling over. "You've been sneaking around with my cousin, lying to my face, and now you want me to believe there's nothing more? You expect me to just take your word for it?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought maybe she'd finally come clean. But then she just shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to protect something. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "If it's not Ryan, then what the hell are you hiding from me?" There was a long silence, the tension between us thick and suffocating. She looked at me, her lip quivering, but she said nothing. It was like she was frozen, unable to give me the one thing I needed. And that's when it hit me. There was something bigger, something she couldn't, or wouldn't, say. Ryan might have been part of it, but there was something else, something that made her more terrified of the truth than anything else. The thought chilled me to the bone. I stepped back, shaking my head. "You can't even say it, can you? Whatever this is, it's worse than I thought." She didn't respond, just stood there, tears streaming down her face. And that silence, that refusal to speak, it told me everything I needed to know. I turned away, grabbing my keys. "I can't do this right now. I need some time to think." "Please," she whispered behind me. "Please don't go." But I didn't look back. I walked out the door, my mind a storm of questions and suspicions. Whatever Jessica was hiding, I was going to find out. And I knew it was going to destroy everything. I slammed the door behind me, the cold night air hitting me as I stepped outside. My thoughts were spinning out of control, every scenario darker than the last. I needed air, space, anything to calm down. I got into my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, but I didn't turn the key. I just sat there, staring blankly at the windshield, trying to make sense of everything. And then my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, but something told me to check. It was a message from an unknown number. "Hey, we need to talk. It's about Jessica." My heart dropped. I didn't recognize the number, but the timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. My hands trembled as I quickly texted back, "Who is this?" There was no immediate response. I stared at the screen, anxiety building, until finally, another message appeared. "Meet me at the corner of 5th and Park. You deserve to know the truth." My stomach twisted. It felt like some kind of trap, but at this point, I was desperate for answers. I didn't even know who this person was, but I knew if they had something to do with Jessica, I had to find out. I started the car, my mind racing as I drove to the meeting spot. The streets were quiet, the orange glow of the streetlights casting long shadows as I pulled up to the corner. My heart pounded in my chest, unsure of what I was walking into. I parked, looking around, but the street was empty. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure step out from the shadows. A man, tall, wearing a black hoodie. As he approached, I felt a sudden jolt of recognition. It was Mark, Jessica's old coworker from a few years back. The one she swore she barely talked to anymore. "Mark?" I said, stepping out of the car. "What the hell are you doing here? What's going on?" He stopped a few feet away, his face grim. "I didn't know how else to do this. You needed to know the truth about Jessica, about what's really been happening." My chest tightened. "What are you talking about? What do you know?" Mark hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I've been trying to stay out of this for a long time. I didn't want to get involved. But things have gotten messy, and you need to understand. Ryan isn't the only one. He never was. The world felt like it tipped on its axis." "What the hell do you mean?" "Jessica and I," he trailed off, looking down like he couldn't bear to make eye contact. "We've been seeing each other. For a while." My mind went blank for a second, like the air had been sucked out of the universe. "Seeing each other?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded, guilt written all over his face. "It started years ago, back when we worked together. She told me it was complicated between you two, that she didn't want to leave you but, she wasn't happy. We kept it secret for a long time, but things got intense. And when I left the company, I thought we'd end it, but she kept coming back. I felt like I was going to be sick. So, all this time, it wasn't just Ryan." Mark shook his head, his expression heavy with regret. "No. She was with both of us. I don't think Ryan even knows about me. I think she's been trying to juggle everything, but it's all starting to fall apart." My knees felt weak, the weight of everything crashing down on me. This was too much. Jessica had been playing me, lying to my face over and over, dragging my cousin and this guy into the mess of our marriage. And I had been blind to it all. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why now, after all this time?" "Because I'm done," Mark said firmly. "I told her I wasn't going to keep sneaking around. I didn't want to be a part of her games anymore. And, she's pregnant." My heart stopped. "Pregnant?" I stared at him, stunned, unable to form words. Mark looked just as shaken. "She didn't tell you, did she?" he asked quietly. "No," I whispered, barely able to process what I was hearing. "She didn't tell me." I stood there, the cold night pressing in, the weight of Mark's words suffocating me. Jessica was pregnant, and now I didn't even know if the child was mine. I stood frozen, Mark's words echoing in my head, "She's pregnant." The silence between us stretched painfully as I tried to wrap my mind around everything. Jessica, the woman I thought I knew, had been hiding so much, too much. I barely heard Mark's last words, but when they sank in, my blood ran cold. "She didn't tell you, did she?" I could barely whisper, "No, she didn't." Mark sighed, his face a mix of guilt and exhaustion. I had a feeling. She's been acting strange, avoiding me too. Look, man, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I'm sorry for what I did, but I had no idea how deep this mess went. I wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that Jessica had been lying to me for God knows how long, or that Mark wasn't even sure if he was the father. The thought made my stomach churn. I was about to say something, but my phone buzzed again. Another text. This time from Jessica. Come home. We need to talk. I clenched my jaw, anger and hurt boiling under my skin. I looked at Mark, who seemed as lost in this mess as I was. I need to go. I have to get some answers. Mark nodded, stepping back. I'm sorry, man. For everything. I didn't respond, just got in my car and sped home. My mind was racing, trying to piece together how deep Jessica's betrayal went. If the baby wasn't mine, or Ryan's, or even Mark's, then whose was it? What the hell was she hiding? When I got home, Jessica was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked up as I walked in, eyes pleading, but I didn't want to hear any more lies. We're going to talk, I said, my voice firm. And this time, I want the truth. All of it. She nodded, swallowing hard. I know I've messed up. I didn't want it to get this far. I didn't know how to tell you. Tell me what? I demanded, the frustration rising in my chest. That you've been with Ryan. That you've been with Mark too. That you've been lying to my face for God knows how long. Or maybe that you're pregnant, and the baby might not even be mine. Her face crumpled, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. I was scared, she whispered. Scared of what you'd think, scared of how I'd hurt you. And now it's all falling apart. I felt my hands shaking, fists clenching in an effort to stay calm. Then tell me the truth, Jessica. Is the baby even mine? She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. My heart sank. It's not, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My breath caught in my throat. Even though part of me had been preparing for this, hearing it out loud hit like a wrecking ball. Who's the father then? I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. If it's not mine, not Ryan's, and not Mark's, who the hell is it? Jessica sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I don't know. The words hung in the air like poison. I stared at her, my mind spinning. You don't know. You don't know who the father of your child is. My voice cracked, the hurt and betrayal overwhelming. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I was lost, okay. I didn't know what I was doing anymore. After everything, after Ryan, after Mark, I felt so empty. I started seeing someone else, someone I barely knew. It was reckless and stupid, and I never thought it would go this far. I could barely breathe. Someone else? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. So you don't even know this guy? Jessica looked up at me, her face twisted in agony. I don't. It was supposed to be nothing. A one-time thing. I never thought I'd get pregnant. I stood there, numb. My whole life had just unraveled in the span of a single conversation. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, had been lying, cheating, and now she was carrying a child that wasn't mine, or anyone's I even knew. I took a step back, the weight of the betrayal crushing me. I can't do this, I whispered. I can't even look at you. She sobbed harder, but I couldn't stay there anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating me. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, my mind spinning with disbelief, anger, and unbearable pain. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew one thing, I couldn't stay in that house another second. Jessica's voice echoed in my head, but all I could feel was emptiness. The person I had trusted most had shattered everything, and now, I didn't even know who I was anymore. I stormed out of the house, my thoughts a tangled mess of rage, pain, and confusion. Jessica's words kept repeating in my head, she didn't know who the father was. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. After everything, Ryan, Mark, now this faceless stranger, how could she be so reckless? I started driving, not even sure where I was headed. I just needed to clear my head, to get as far away from the mess of my life as possible. As I drove aimlessly, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen, another unknown number. I didn't want to answer, but something told me to pick up. "Hello?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. There was a brief pause, then a familiar voice. "Hey, it's Brian." I blinked. Brian? My old coworker. We hadn't talked in months. Brian? What's going on, man? He cleared his throat, sounding uneasy. Listen, this is going to sound really weird, but I ran into Jessica a while back. We were at the same conference a few months ago, you know, the one in New York. I frowned, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. Yeah, I remember that. She mentioned she went. Why? Brian hesitated. Well, I didn't think much of it at the time, but we ended up at the same after-party. And, she wasn't alone. My heart sank. What do you mean? She was with this guy, Brian continued, sounding more uncomfortable by the second. I don't know who he was, but they were close. Like, really close. I remember thinking it was strange because she kept introducing him as some business contact, but they were acting like more than that. I didn't want to stir up trouble, so I didn't say anything. The puzzle pieces clicked together in my head. That conference had been around the same time she started pulling away, acting distant. My stomach dropped. Brian, do you know who the guy was? Can you describe him? He hesitated again. Yeah, I remember him pretty clearly. Tall, dark hair, kinda stocky. Seemed like he worked in finance, or maybe marketing, definitely not someone from your circle. I felt a chill run down my spine. Wait, was his name Chris? Brian paused, clearly caught off guard. Yeah, actually. I think that's what she called him. Chris something. Why? Do you know him? My heart pounded in my chest. Chris was Jessica's ex from years ago, the one she briefly dated before we got together. She'd mentioned him a few times over the years, always brushing it off as a relationship that never went anywhere. But now, was he back? I thanked Brian quickly and hung up, my hands shaking as I processed the realization. Chris. Of course. That was why Jessica had been so evasive, why she'd never told me who the father was, she knew it would ruin everything. I turned the car around, driving straight back to the house. My mind was racing, and as much as I dreaded the confrontation, I needed to say this to her face. When I walked back in, Jessica was still sitting at the kitchen table, staring down at her hands, her face streaked with tears. She looked up when she heard the door open, her eyes red and puffy. I thought you'd left, she whispered. I ignored her plea, walking right up to the table and sitting across from her. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't hold back anymore. I know who the father is. Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she seemed frozen. What? I just got off the phone with Brian, I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. He saw you at that conference in New York. With Chris. Her face went pale, her lips trembling. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I leaned forward, my anger spilling out. Chris. Your ex. You slept with him, didn't you? That's why you've been hiding the truth from me. It's his baby, isn't it? Jessica's eyes filled with fresh tears, her hands shaking as she tried to respond. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I saw him at the conference, and things just spiraled. I didn't think it would go this far. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "You've been lying to me for months," I said, my voice trembling. "You let me believe this was about Ryan, about Mark, but the whole time it was him." She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to face this." I stood up, my body shaking with fury. "You don't get to be sorry now, Jessica. You've destroyed everything." The silence that followed was suffocating. I felt the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me, heavier than I could bear. I didn't know what was worse, the affair itself, or the fact that she'd kept it hidden for so long, letting me believe I could still fix things. But now, everything was broken beyond repair. And I wasn't sure I could ever forgive her. I stood there, my whole world collapsing around me, trying to process the fact that Jessica had been hiding the truth about Chris, the father of her unborn child. But as I looked at her, sobbing, face buried in her hands, something still felt off, like there was more she wasn't telling me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was another layer of deceit waiting to be uncovered. I turned to leave, needing air, but something made me stop mid-step. A voice in the back of my mind whispered, "You still don't know everything." I turned back toward her. "What else are you hiding, Jessica?" She looked up, her face streaked with tears, her eyes wide with panic. "What? What do you mean? I've told you everything." "No, you haven't," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I can feel it. This can't be the end of it. There's something else, isn't there? Something even worse." Her hands started shaking again, and for a moment, she looked like she was going to deny it. But then she let out a broken sigh, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Her eyes, full of guilt, wouldn't meet mine. "I didn't want you to ever know," she whispered, barely audible. My stomach twisted. "Know what?" She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "Before we got serious, before we even started dating officially, I had a child." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. "A child? What are you talking about?" She wiped her eyes, her body shaking as she struggled to speak. "It was just after I ended things with Chris the first time, before we ever got together. I got pregnant, but I wasn't ready to be a mother. I was young and scared, and I didn't know what to do. So I gave the baby up for adoption." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. All these years, 8 years of our relationship, and she'd hidden something so monumental, a child. My head spun, trying to process it. "You've had a child this entire time, and you never told me?" My voice cracked under the weight of the betrayal. "I didn't know how," she cried, her voice breaking. "By the time we got serious, I'd already given the baby up. I didn't want it to affect our relationship, to change how you saw me. And then the years went by, and I didn't know how to bring it up. You hid something like that from me? For 8 years?" I could barely breathe, my chest tightening with disbelief. "Jessica, we talked about everything. Our future, kids, our past. How could you look me in the eyes every day and not tell me something this big?" She sobbed, covering her face again. "I was ashamed. I didn't want you to think less of me. I didn't want to lose you." I paced back and forth, trying to keep myself from exploding. "So, all this time, you've been carrying this secret? You gave up a child, and you just buried it? And then you had the nerve to lie about everything else on top of that?" "I never meant to hurt you," she sobbed. "I was scared, and I thought I could keep it in the past, but now everything is falling apart. I didn't know what to do." The room spun around me, everything crumbling beneath the weight of her deceit. First, the affair with Ryan. Then Mark. And now, this. She'd hidden the fact that she had a child she gave away, throughout our entire relationship. How many more lies had she been telling? I stood there, trying to catch my breath, my head pounding with the enormity of it all. Where is the child now? Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. I don't know. It was a closed adoption. I haven't had any contact. I shook my head in disbelief. You've been living this lie for so long, Jessica. What else are you keeping from me? She didn't answer, just sat there crying, her guilt pouring out into the silence between us. I felt a rage and sadness like I'd never felt before, the sheer magnitude of her betrayal suffocating me. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. The walls felt like they were closing in, pressing down on me with every secret she'd kept from me. I turned and walked out the door, feeling like I was walking away from everything I'd ever known, because, in a way, I was. The Jessica I thought I knew had never existed. I stormed back into the house, fury and disbelief surging through me. Jessica looked up from the table, startled by my sudden return, her face pale and tear-streaked. Before she could speak, I slammed my phone down on the table, her latest text flashing on the screen. You've been visiting the child? I spat, the words burning on my tongue. The one you've been hiding from me for 8 years? You've been seeing her for a year behind my back. Her eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't let her. You never told me about her, Jessica. All this time, I thought I knew you, that we were building a life together, and you've been keeping a child from me? And now you've been sneaking around, visiting her without even telling me? Tears welled up in her eyes as she stood, trembling. I didn't plan for this to happen, I swear. I thought it was over, I thought I could move on. But I found her, and I couldn't let it go. I didn't know how to tell you. How could you not tell me? I snapped, my voice rising. You've been living a lie, Jessica. You didn't just hide an affair or one bad decision, you hid the fact that you had a child. A whole person out there who's connected to you, and you kept it from me for our entire relationship. Her tears fell freely now, her voice breaking. I was scared. I didn't know how you'd react. I didn't want you to see me differently. I shook my head, pacing as my mind raced to make sense of the betrayal. So you've been seeing her behind my back? Hiring a private investigator to track her down after you gave her up? What else, Jessica? What else haven't you told me? She wiped her face, sobbing. I found her a year ago. I wasn't supposed to know where she was. It was a closed adoption, but I couldn't let it go. I had to know. And when I found her, I couldn't just walk away. My stomach churned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So for an entire year, you've been playing house with this child, pretending like this part of your life didn't exist while keeping me in the dark. Her voice cracked. She's not mine anymore. I signed away my rights. But seeing her, it felt like I could make up for what I did, for giving her away. I didn't want to hurt you. Hurt me? I repeated, incredulous. Do you even hear yourself? You've been lying to me for years, hiding this massive secret. And now you've been sneaking off, living this double life, trying to make up for it. How do you think that makes me feel? She shook her head, looking devastated. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I could handle it, but I couldn't. I wanted to tell you, I just didn't know how. I took a step back, the weight of her betrayal hitting me all over again. So when exactly did you have this child, Jessica? Because I thought we'd been together almost 8 years. Where the hell does this fit into everything? She winced, her face crumpling in guilt. I had her before we met, just a few months before. I was young and overwhelmed, and I didn't know what else to do. I gave her up for adoption, and I thought I could leave it in the past. But I never really could. I stood there, stunned. The timeline was clear, this child wasn't mine, not that I ever thought she was. But knowing she'd had a child right before we started dating, and that she had hidden it from me all this time. That was too much. So all these years, you've been hiding this from me, I said, my voice quieter but no less furious. You've been lying, pretending like this huge part of your life never happened. And now, on top of everything with Ryan and Mark, I'm supposed to believe that this is the whole story? She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I didn't know how to tell you. I was ashamed. I thought you'd leave me if you found out. I didn't want to lose you. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her deceit pressing down on me like a boulder. Jessica, I already don't recognize the person standing in front of me. You've been lying to me for our entire relationship. You lost me the moment you decided to keep all of this from me. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the regret and guilt in her eyes, but it wasn't enough. No amount of apologies could undo the damage she had done. I didn't know who Jessica really was anymore. I wasn't sure I ever had. I stood there, staring at Jessica, my head pounding as the full weight of her lies came crashing down on me. Everything we'd built together, all the memories, the moments I thought were real, it was all poison now. How could I ever trust a word she said again? She was still sobbing, but I couldn't find any sympathy left in me. The woman I thought I loved had been hiding parts of her life so deeply that I didn't even know who she was anymore. Do you understand what you've done? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the silence. You've been living a double life. Lying about a child, lying about Ryan, Mark, Chris, what else, Jessica? What else haven't you told me? Her sobs intensified as she shook her head, but I wasn't sure if it was denial or the weight of her guilt. There's nothing else, she choked out, her voice desperate. I swear, there's nothing else. But I didn't believe her. Not anymore. How can I trust you? I said, feeling my anger rise again. For 8 years, you've looked me in the eyes every day, knowing you had a child out there. You could have told me, but you chose to hide it. What kind of person does that? Jessica wiped her tears with trembling hands, her voice barely audible. I was scared. I was ashamed. I didn't know how to tell you. Stop using that excuse, I interrupted, my voice cold. You've been scared. You've been ashamed. What about me, Jessica? What about the life we've been living? You dragged me into a relationship built on nothing but lies. She stepped closer, her eyes pleading, but I took a step back, not wanting her anywhere near me. Please, I can explain. Explain what? I snapped, cutting her off again. That you've been living this secret life while pretending we had something real? There's nothing left to explain. For a moment, we stood in silence, her sobs the only sound in the room. I could see the regret in her eyes, but it didn't matter. No amount of tears or apologies could erase the damage she'd done. Finally, I spoke again, my voice calmer but filled with resignation. I can't do this anymore, Jessica. Her eyes widened, panic filling her face. Please, don't say that, she begged, stepping forward again. We can fix this. I'll tell you everything, I swear. We can go to counseling, we can. No, I said firmly, shaking my head. You've already destroyed any chance of fixing this. I don't even know who you are anymore. How can I work on a marriage when I don't even know the person I'm supposed to be married to? She collapsed into a chair, her body shaking as she sobbed harder, but I couldn't stay there to watch her fall apart. I couldn't watch her try to salvage something that had been dead long before I even knew it. I turned and headed toward the door, my chest tightening with each step. I paused for a moment, gripping the handle, unsure if I had the strength to leave for good. But then I remembered the weight of her lies, the betrayal that cut so deep I could feel it in my bones. I opened the door. Where are you going? She cried behind me, her voice full of desperation. I didn't look back. I don't know yet. But I can't stay here. I can't be with someone I don't trust. The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with finality, before I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The person I thought I knew, the life I thought we had, it was gone. And maybe it had never really existed in the first place. As I walked away from the house, I realized that there was no coming back from this. Not for me. Not for us. Jessica's lies had broken something inside me, something that could never be fixed. The future ahead of me was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to live in the shadow of her lies any longer. The night air felt heavy as I walked away from the house, my mind still reeling from the weight of everything Jessica had hidden from me. Each step felt like I was leaving behind the life I thought I had, the home we built, the love we shared, the plans for a future that now seemed like a cruel joke. I drove aimlessly for a while, not sure where to go, just needing to escape the suffocating reality that had become my life. I pulled into a small parking lot outside a park and sat there in the car, staring out at the empty swings swaying in the breeze. How had it all come to this? After what felt like hours, I finally pulled out my phone. I had no idea who to call or where to begin, but I needed someone, some kind of anchor to stop me from spiraling completely out of control. Without thinking, I dialed my best friend, Mike. He picked up after a few rings. "Hey, man. Everything all right?" he asked, sounding half asleep but immediately concerned. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence stretched for a moment before I finally managed to choke out, "No. Nothing's all right." Mike instantly picked up on the tone in my voice. "What happened? Where are you?" "I don't even know where to start," I whispered, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Jessica, she's been lying to me. About everything." "What?" Mike asked, sounding wide awake now. "What do you mean?" I let out a bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. "She's been cheating, for starters. With Ryan. And Mark. But that's not even the worst part." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Jesus, man. I had no idea." What's the worst part?" I could barely say the words out loud. "She has a child. She gave birth before we met, and she's been hiding it from me for 8 years. And she's been visiting this kid for the past year, behind my back." Mike swore under his breath, clearly as shocked as I was when I found out. "Are you serious? She kept a child from you? For all these years?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yeah. And now I don't know what the hell to do. I feel like I don't even know who she is anymore." Mike let out a long breath. "Man, that's heavy. I don't even know what to say. But you can't go through this alone. Do you want me to come meet you?" I hesitated for a second, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice weak. "I'm at the park off Main Street." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Mike said without hesitation. "Just hang in there." I hung up the phone, staring blankly out at the darkened park. Everything felt surreal, like I was trapped in some nightmare I couldn't wake up from. How could everything fall apart so fast? How could the woman I trusted with my heart, my life, betray me in ways I couldn't even begin to understand? I sat there, trying to breathe through the pain, until I saw Mike's car pull up next to mine. He got out, looking grim but ready to be the support I desperately needed. As he approached, he shook his head, looking at me with deep concern. "I'm so sorry, man. I don't even know what to say. I can't believe she did that to you." I got out of the car, feeling a weight lift just by having someone there who understood. "Neither can I," I muttered. "I thought I knew her. I thought I knew everything about her, and now it's like I've been living with a stranger." Mike sighed, leaning against his car. "What are you going to do now?" I shrugged, feeling helpless. "I don't know. I don't think I can go back to her." Not after all this. You shouldn't, Mike said firmly, his tone protective. She's lied to you about so much, and she didn't just make one mistake. She's been hiding this for years. You can't rebuild trust after something like that. I nodded, knowing he was right but feeling the deep sadness of it all. I don't even know who I am without her. We've been together for so long. Mike placed a hand on my shoulder. You're stronger than you think. It's going to be hard, but you'll get through this. You don't need her lies weighing you down anymore. I looked out at the dark sky, feeling the enormity of the situation pressing down on me. I don't know where to start. You start by taking one step at a time, Mike said, his voice steady. You get out of that toxic situation, and you take back control of your life. You've been living in her shadow, her lies, for too long. Now it's time to focus on yourself. I took a deep breath, the truth of his words sinking in. Yeah. I guess you're right. Mike nodded. I've got your back, man. You're not going through this alone. For the first time that night, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I wasn't completely lost. Maybe, somehow, I'd find a way to rebuild after this. But one thing was for sure, my life with Jessica, the life I thought I had, was over. It was time to figure out who I was without her lies. Mike and I stayed at the park for a while, sitting in silence, the weight of everything hanging in the air. He didn't push me to talk, and I appreciated that. Sometimes, you just need someone to be there, no words, just presence. Eventually, the numbness started to give way to something else, an overwhelming sense of finality. I knew what I had to do. Staying with Jessica wasn't an option anymore. I had to cut her out of my life, as painful as it was. Every time I thought about the lies, the child, the affairs, it felt like a punch to the gut. She wasn't the person I thought she was. She wasn't the woman I had imagined building a life with. Mike finally broke the silence. You want to crash at my place tonight? No sense going back there right now. I nodded slowly. Yeah, thanks, man. I don't think I can handle seeing her tonight. Of course. You can take as much time as you need. We'll figure out the next steps together. We got in our cars, and I followed him back to his apartment. I kept replaying the conversation with Jessica in my head, the moment when she admitted everything, how she'd been visiting her child for the past year, how she gave her away and never told me. It still felt unreal, like some twisted movie I couldn't escape from. The fact that I'd been living in this lie for 8 years, it made me sick. When we got to Mike's place, he set me up in the guest room, but I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the reality of my broken relationship pressing down on me. Jessica had completely shattered the trust one had in her. First with Ryan, then Mark, and now this child. How many secrets could one person keep? My mind kept drifting back to the moment she admitted she had a child. I couldn't stop thinking about that. How could she hide something so monumental? How could I have been so blind? Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep. I got up, pacing the room, trying to make sense of what to do next. There was no future with Jessica anymore. That much was clear. But how did I begin to disentangle myself from the life we'd built together? I sat down, staring out the window, my phone clutched in my hand. I needed to take action, some kind of step to make this real, to start moving forward. I opened my contacts and scrolled until I found my lawyer's number. It had been there for years, never used, but now I needed it. I texted him, knowing it was too late for a call, but I didn't care. Hey, I need to talk to you about filing for divorce. It's urgent. I sat there for a moment, the word divorce feeling foreign but also inevitable. It wasn't just about Jessica anymore. It was about my life, my future, and not living under the weight of her lies. As I hit send, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. This was the first step toward reclaiming my life, even if it was painful. Mike must have heard me pacing because a few minutes later, he knocked on the door and poked his head in. "You alright, man?" I shook my head, sighing. "I texted my lawyer. I'm filing for divorce." He walked in, nodding. "It's the right move. You can't rebuild with someone who's lied to you for that long. It's a betrayal on too many levels." I rubbed my face, feeling the exhaustion of it all hit me. I thought we were going to spend our lives together, you know. And now, it's like I'm starting over. Mike sat down beside me. "I know it feels like that now, but you're not starting from zero. You've got a life outside of her. Friends, family, your career. She doesn't get to take all of that from you." "I guess," I muttered, though the weight of starting over felt heavier than I could explain. "You'll get through this," Mike said, his voice steady. "It's gonna hurt like hell, but in time, you'll be stronger for it. And one day, you'll find someone who doesn't hide things, someone who loves you the way you deserve." I looked at him, grateful for his support. I didn't know what the future held, but Mike was right. I had to start reclaiming my life. The road ahead looked uncertain, but at least now I had taken the first step. I couldn't let Jessica's lies define the rest of my life. As I sat there in the quiet of Mike's apartment, the decision to move forward with the divorce began to settle in. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew it was the only way I could begin to heal. This was the end of one chapter, but maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something new. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I could breathe. The morning light crept through the blinds, and for the first time in days, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not happiness, far from it, but a quiet calm, like the storm that had been raging inside me was finally beginning to settle. I had made my decision. There was no turning back now. The weight of everything that had happened, the lies, the betrayal, the secrets, it was heavy, but knowing I was taking control of my life again made it bearable. Mike made coffee, and we sat in his kitchen in silence for a while, the smell of it filling the small space. I appreciated that he didn't push me to talk. Sometimes, silence is the best company. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was my lawyer. "Let's talk," the message said. I sighed, staring at the screen for a moment before standing up. "I've got to go meet with my lawyer," I told Mike. "Time to make this official." He nodded. "Good. You're doing the right thing." I wasn't sure if there was a right thing in a situation like this. Nothing about this felt good. It felt like loss, like the end of a life I thought I'd have. But maybe it was the only way forward. I grabbed my jacket and left for the meeting, knowing that the divorce papers would be the final nail in the coffin of my relationship with Jessica. The meeting with the lawyer was surprisingly quick. I went over the details, signed what I needed to sign, and that was it. The wheels were now in motion, and it hit me, this was the end. The marriage, the home we shared, the future we talked about, it was over. When I got back to the car, I sat for a moment, staring at my phone. I had one unread message from Jessica. "I know you hate me right now, but I'm sorry for everything. I wish things had been different. Please don't hate me forever." I didn't respond. What was there left to say? Sorry didn't erase 8 years of lies. It didn't change the fact that she had been sneaking behind my back with Ryan, Mark, and even Chris. It didn't make up for the fact that she had hidden an entire child from me for nearly a decade. I had nothing left to give her. She had taken it all, my trust, my faith in her, the future I thought we were building. And yet, I didn't feel anger anymore. Just emptiness. Maybe that was a sign I was finally moving on. I drove back to the house to gather my things. It was strange walking in, knowing it wasn't my home anymore. Everything inside was tainted by what I knew now, every memory, every piece of furniture, every photo on the walls. It wasn't mine. It was hers. Jessica was sitting on the couch when I came in, her face red and swollen from crying. She didn't say anything as I walked past her, heading to the bedroom to pack a bag. As I zipped up the suitcase, I felt her presence behind me. "I guess this is it, huh?" she said, her voice shaky. I turned around, looking at the woman I thought I'd spend my life with, now just a stranger to me. "Yeah," I said quietly. "This is it." She stepped closer, wiping her eyes. "I didn't want it to end this way. I'm so sorry for everything. I know I've lost you, but I still care about you. I always will." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure I believed her, and even if I did, it didn't matter. "I'm filing for divorce. I think we both know there's no coming back from this." She nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know." I picked up the suitcase and walked past her toward the door. It felt final, like the closing of a book I wasn't ready to finish, but I had no choice. "Goodbye, Jessica." "Goodbye," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I left the house without looking back. There was nothing for me there anymore. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, I started rebuilding. The divorce process was painful, as expected, but each step felt like shedding the weight of the past. Mike stayed by my side, and I leaned on the people who mattered, the ones who hadn't betrayed me. It wasn't easy, but I wasn't alone. I found an apartment, a small place that felt like a fresh start. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No secrets, no lies, just a quiet space where I could begin to heal. One evening, a few months after leaving Jessica, I sat on my new couch, looking out the window as the sun set. The future still felt uncertain, but it no longer terrified me. I wasn't drowning in the pain of betrayal anymore. Instead, I was learning to let go, to leave behind the life I thought I'd have and embrace the one I was rebuilding. Jessica had reached out a few more times, but I never responded. It wasn't out of spite, I just didn't need her in my life anymore. Whatever we had was gone, and I was finally at peace with that. As the light faded, I thought about what Mike had said, "You'll get through this. You'll be stronger for it." He was right. I wasn't the same person I was before Jessica's lies unraveled everything, but maybe that was okay. I had lost a lot, but I had gained something too: clarity, strength, and the knowledge that I deserved more than the lies I had been living under. The future was mine now. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.